2. Satan, though he is said to have the power of death, Hebrews 2:14, yet this is not to be understood as if he had a power and the right to inflict death at pleasure on men. For if so, such is his malice and rooted enmity to man, that the race of mankind would have been extinct long ago. The case of Job shows that he lies under the restraint of God in this matter. He may have been, by divine permission, in some instances the executioner of death to the enemies of God, and to such who have given up themselves unto him and sold themselves to work wickedness. He was the introducer of sin into the world, the cause of death, and both are the works of the devil, which Christ came to destroy, and has destroyed. And Satan, because of his concern in the ruin of our first parent by his temptations, and so of all mankind, he is said to be a murderer from the beginning. John 8, verse 44. 3. Death of right is of God only. It is he who threatened with it in case of sin and made it the sanction of his law. Death, whenever he comes and attacks man, it is by a commission from God. He is sometimes represented as a person coming up at our windows and into our palaces and houses like a bailiff to arrest men, and sometimes as on horseback and armed, and power given him to kill men with various sorts of judgments, as famine, pestilence, sword, and wild beasts. See Jeremiah 9, verse 21, Revelation 6, verse 8. And whatever are the means of the death of men, whether extraordinary or ordinary, they are all of God, and under his direction. Every disorder, disease, and sickness are servants sent by him to execute his pleasure, inasmuch that death is frequently spoken of as his act, and as inflicted by him. It is expressed by taking men away, by taking away their life or soul, by gathering the breath and spirit of men to himself, by prevailing against man, and causing him to pass away, and by changing his countenance, and sending him away. Job 27, verse 8, and 32:22, and 34, verse 14, and 14, verse 20. 4. Death is by his appointment. It is the statute law of heaven. Hebrews 9, verse 27. The grave is the house appointed for all men living. Job 30, 23. All things leading to death, and which issue in it, are under a divine appointment. All afflictions, diseases, and disorders are of God. These are not fortuitous events that come by chance or spring out of the dust, but come by the appointment of God to bring about the desolation by death. All the circumstances of it are according to the determinate counsel and will of God, as what death and by what event a man shall die, and the manner of his death, and the place where. For though we are told where we were born, and know where we now live, yet no man knows where he shall die. None but God knows this, who has determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of man's habitations, where they shall live and where they shall die. The time of a man's death is appointed by God, for there is a time for every purpose of God for the execution of it, a time to be born, a time to die. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 and 2. There is an appointed time for man on earth when he shall come into the world, how long he shall continue in it, and when he shall go out of it. And before this time no man dies. The Jews sought to lay hold on Christ to take away his life, but they could not, because his hour was not yet come, and the same holds good for every man. Nor can any live longer than the appointed time. The time draws nigh that Israel must die. Genesis 47:29. There was a time fixed for it, that was at hand, when he must die, and there was no going beyond it, says Job. Of man, his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. Job 14, verse 5. A man cannot lengthen out his days, nor another for him. No man can add 1 cubit unto his stature, or rather to his age. Matthew 6, verse 27. The days of man are compared to a hand's breadth, Psalm 39, verse 5, and is hand's breadth, and to this hand's breadth a cubit, nor indeed any measure at all can be added with all the thought, care, and means that can be made use of. Physicians, in this respect, are of no value. They cannot prolong the life of a man. They may make life a little more easy and comfortable while it lasts, but they cannot protect it one moment, nor can men that bound with wealth and riches give to God a ransom for themselves and others, that they should still live forever and see no corruption. Psalm 49, 6-9. There are several things objected to this, but what has been mostly answered already, as that Hezekiah had 15 years added to his days, and some men not living out of half their days, and dying before their time. Psalm 55:23, Ezekiel 7:17. As for the objection taken from the insufficiency and uselessness of means and temptations to lay them aside, if things are so that no man can live longer nor die sooner than the appointed time, it should be known that in general, with respect to these things, civil or sacred, the means are equally appointed as to the end, and to be used in order to it. This appears in the case of Hezekiah, though the decree was express and peremptory, that 15 years should be certainly added to his days. Yet the prophet that brought the message from the Lord and the king that received it both agreed to have a plaster of figs laid upon the boil for the recovery of his health and the continuance of his life. Isaiah 38:21, also Acts 27, verse 31. Secondly, the procuring or meritorious cause of death is sin. It was threatened in the case of sin, and when sin entered the world, death came in by it. It is the wages and demerit of sin. The body is dead because of sin. It has become mortal and dies on account of it. Romans 5, verse 12, and 6:23, and 8:10. Man was originally made an immortal creature. The soul, in its own nature, is such, being immaterial. And though the body is composed of matter, and such as was capable of being reduced and dissolved into the elements from which it was made for sin, yet it was gifted by God with immortality. And had man continued in this state of innocence, the gift would have remained with him. For the death of the body is not the fruit and effects of nature, as say the Socinians, but of sin. For if man would have died according to the course of nature, whether he had sinned or no, to what purpose was the threatening, in the day that thou eat thereof thou shalt surely die, if he would and must have died, whether he had sinned or no? But it was through sinning that he became mortal, like the beasts, and perish or die as they do. Otherwise, man would have continued immortal, and by means directed to, and would have been supported in his present life, without dying or any fear of it, or would have been translated to a higher kind of life forevermore. Thirdly, the instrumental causes or means of death are various, or which and who are employed in the execution of it. Angels are sometimes made use of to inflict it. Thus an angel in one night slew in the Assyrian camp 144 and 5,000. 2 Kings 19, verse 35. Multitudes are cut off by the sword of justice in the hand of the civil magistrate, and that by the order and appointment of God. God has his 4 judgments: sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts, by which sometimes great havoc is made among men. The ordinary means by which death is instrumentally brought about are disorders and distempers of the body, which operate sometimes in a quicker and sometimes in a slower way, yet sooner or later they are the causes of men's drawing to the grave and their life to the destroyers.